Good evening everybody, and welcome to a video on how neurons work. So before we get into how they work, I'm just going to point out the different parts of a neuron. So as you can see here, the dendrite at the beginning is where neurotransmitters are received from a previous cell. Then the signal will travel along this portion, which is called the axon. And the axon is the part of the neuron that releases neurotransmitters into this portion, which is the synapse, which is basically the space between one neuron that is releasing a signal and the next neuron which is receiving the signal. And this is called the presynaptic side, is the part with the axon on it that's releasing neurotransmitters, and this side with the next neurotransmitter that is receiving the signal on its dendrites is the postsynaptic side of the synapse. So with that being said, neurons communicate with each other via electrical signals, which are passed along by action potentials. So an action potential starts in one neuron. It travels down the axon of the neuron and causes neurotransmitters to be released from its axon, and then these neurotransmitters bind to the next neuron on its dendrites, and they cause this neuron to either pass the signal along or tell the signal to stop there. So to get an idea of how action potentials occur, I've drawn a salty banana up here. And a neuron is like a salty banana because it has positively charged sodium ions on the outside of it and negatively charged chloride ions on the outside of it. Additionally, it has positively charged potassium ions on the inside of it, just like a banana has potassium on the inside of it as well. So this is important because these ions allow an action potential to occur. So if you direct your attention to this graph over here, normally a neuron is negatively charged at about negative 70 millivolts. And when an action potential starts, it opens its sodium channels on it, and this causes sodium to flow into the neuron, and overall it causes the cell to become positively charged. And this positive charge is what allows the cell to open its calcium channels on its axon, and calcium flows into the axons and causes neurotransmitters to be packaged into vesicles and released out of its axon. So that's why it's important that you have the cell become positively charged during an action potential. Then at the top here, potassium channels are opened on the cell, and potassium flows out of the neuron, which actually causes the cell to become more negatively charged, and eventually it will reach back to its negative 70 millivolt resting potential, or maybe even a little bit lower than that. So once an action potential is complete and the neurotransmitters are released from the neuron and bind to this new neuron, these neurotransmitters communicate to the new neuron what type of ion channel should be opened. So if these neurotransmitters communicate that sodium channels should be opened, then sodium once again flows into the neuron, causes it to become positively charged, and the signal is passed down the axon to a new neuron, and so on and so forth. In contrast, if this neurotransmitter causes chloride ion channels to be opened and chloride flows into the neuron, then instead of going up and becoming more positively charged, the neuron becomes more negatively charged. And this ultimately stops the signal dead in its tracks. So no signal is passed along to the new neuron. So when a signal is passed along to a new neuron, that's called an excitatory signal. And when the signal is stopped at this neuron, that's called an inhibitory signal. So neurotransmitters that cause excitatory signals are called excitatory neurotransmitters, whereas neurotransmitters that cause inhibitory signals are called inhibitory neurotransmitters. So I hope that's given you a basic idea of how a neuron works, and you have a good rest of your evening.